So thank you, Dr. Vernita Perkins, for the introduction. I am grateful for the invitation from Division 27, from you specifically, and just humbled, really humbled, extremely humbled to present today. My hope is to shed some light on my journey in social justice and the context of research engagement, clinical work, and advocacy. I'm going to ask for forgiveness ahead of time. So I may not go into depth with all the things. And I may be navigating my slides because there's some awkwardness on my end. So I apologize in advance for that. There we go. Here we go. All right. So I always start out with presenting with this slide, or attempt to start out with presenting this slide with this quote and this effort from Dr. Kevin Nadal put forth this campaign about this is what a professor looks like. So often growing up, I did not see myself as what a professor looks like, but this campaign helped me to identify all aspects of my identity and how I show up in the world and convey that to the world. So these are just a few again, identifiers in terms of who I am as a professor. I want to also give honor to my ancestors who helped me to show up, who supported this really neat journey, and folks, family and friends that supported me through the years and encouraged me to stand in truth and authenticity and confront injustices wherever I am. So I just, again, want to acknowledge the wonderfulness of engagement with community, that a professor isn't always in the classroom, that they're out in the world doing the things, that sometimes we have kiddos that we are taking care of as well. So I wanted to acknowledge the two nuggets that are in this picture. My kids, they are my why, like why I need to show up and actually do this work, always do this work in authentic ways so that they can also stand in truth and love and who they are too. I wanted to pay homage to my social justice mentors in my head, Doctors Mimi and Kenneth Clark, who were also on a journey and in terms of in their undergrad and experiences at HBCUs and Howard. I think Mimi went to Fisk and Howard, but they both journeyed there and did their graduate work at PWI. They went to Columbia. Although I didn't go to Columbia, I did go to PWI for my PhD, but learned about them at Howard and really was fascinated by their journey in terms of knowing how to engage with research and elevate it to a policy level, right? So Brown versus the Board of Education, I just, again, um, to know that we can do that critical work, or that we need to do that critical work, is I'm grateful for. I wanted to acknowledge some of the lessons that many of the folks that are in these pictures are part of the matriarch that has built in my family. So I wanted to pay homage to the Page, Rose, Starks, Carter, and Scott clan for the wisdoms that they often and always shared. And I also wanted to acknowledge some of the roots that my family is situated in. They are connected with Black liberation and Marcus Garvey. So from that, they were always about community and people and making sure that we were firm in terms of our identities and who we are as a people, and elevating our Black and Brown folks. So I had folks who were preachers, teachers, nurses, librarians, folks who wrote books about family. That was part of like my lineage. And to know that is love. So some of the lessons that my family really aligned with included choosing love, right? Even though there's harms out there, there's lots of negativity, but if we choose love for our people, love for our friends and communities, love for the earth, being good stewards of the earth, the animals that are on this planet, the creatures that we are living alongside of, honoring and loving them up too, we will get through the world successfully. They were jokesters, so lots of humor also is embedded in my family. We love to laugh at each other and the world as we are also dealing with the traumas. But that helped us kind of lift up our spirits and elevate us. And then connecting with that support in the framework of community was really critical. So if they found out about resources, they would share those resources with community members. If they found out about injustices, they would also advocate and help to like galvanize community members around efforts too. So, and as I mentioned, there were some healers in our family. So, folks who were nurses, caretakers, they really honed in on that notion of being able to rest and heal, recuperate from like the harms that may have come our way. So taking pause and resting and healing was really critical in our family. Ooh, folks also love to travel. So as they rested and healed, they would travel and do the thing. So not to be afraid to leave what felt like home and explore the world around them. Okay? So I took those lessons to heart in many instances. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how I would have been able to connect social justice in terms of the research that I've engaged in. Um, so at Howard, I completed my undergrad at Howard University, represented by the Mecca. You could see Chadwick Boseman in the picture. We were in at Howard around the same time. And again, I grew up in this predominantly white space in town in Poway in San Diego and experienced racial trauma. And so I knew I did not want to remain in California in terms of my college education, knew that I needed to be aligned with culturally affirming spaces. And Howard was the institution that I chose to attend. And by doing that, I was able to really start to come into like myself. So understanding where I was culturally rooted, understanding how to connect with community, understand what it meant to be a Black woman in America, and how to kind of um, find my voice in the work that I did. Right. So I had wonderful models in terms of feminist men who did engage in research, who taught, and feminist Black women who were just, again, really pillars of kind of excellence and took me in and helped me to understand how to engage in research that was aligned with cultural values that were aligned with personal values. We did work around addressing Black and Brown communities impacted by community violence, engaging with family-based interventions, family-based evaluations, exploring resilience and attachment interventions in Black communities. And by participating in those efforts, I was also able to participate in externships and found an externship in San Diego that was African centered, that implemented African rituals and values in the work that they did. So I'll talk a little bit about that later. But again, being exposed to that early on was beautiful, a wonderful foundation for how I and example for how I can engage in research. My research at the University of North Dakota centered on American Indian communities. So I was able to explore that aspect of my identity in at that institution. And by partnering with a few Native American community liaisons and doing a needs assessment, I was able to, with community, identify the impact of intimate partner violence on Native women and their children, specifically their daughters, and explore aspects of rural mental health and trauma that many folks in rural areas were experiencing. So my research and work centered around experiences that weren't exactly mine, but maybe adjacent to mine. But certainly I had to own and understand who I was as a Black and Indigenous individual in order to work in the communities of the University of North Dakota. And I currently participate in similar work. I still do work around intimate partner violence and exploring social determinants of health, not from a deficit lens, really from a health-based and resource-based lens. And I also participate in research that looks at the experiences of um, Native behavioral health students and helping them get through and matriculate their graduate program successfully in a project that is entitled Reservation to Graduation. And another project that is near and dear and aligned to my own experience has to do with the impact of racial trauma on clinical psyche and PhD Black graduate students, exploring their experiences qualitatively. So again, these are just a few ways in which I'm able to align social justice within the research that I engage with in. So I wanted to touch on a few lessons from liberation psychology, decolonizing therapy, and radical healing that help to inform some of the clinical practices that I engage in. Again, leading on these, some of this work helps me to kind of, again, stay true and align with my own authenticity, um, and making sure that I find voice in the, again, clinical work that I engage in. So some of the lessons from liberation psychology include this recovery of historical memory. And by engaging in this, it's the notion of to discover selectively through collective memory those elements of the past that have proved useful in the defense of the interests of exploited classes, which may be applied to like the present struggles, and that essentially helps to increase conscientiousness. So this recovery not only um, aligns with like a sense of one's own identity and pride of belonging to a people, but it also helps one to identify aspects that might actually serve folks today, right? So that process helps to contribute to liberation. So ideologizing and decolonizing are another kind of practice, include another practice that I really appreciate and helps me to kind of understand like how I was trained in this very Western colonized manner. And by undoing those approaches when I engage in therapy, that actually aligns with freedom, not only for myself, but often for the clients that I am working with. So decolonizing therapy has a wonderful praxis in terms of looking at oppression, looking at historical trauma, and fortifying practices that are more aligned and centered and grounded in like helpful ways of working with folks to bring about more awareness to their realities. I lean heavily on the work around Brianna French et al. And one of the tools that has come from the work on the psychology of radical healing framework includes the, identifying and utilizing, tapping into your cultural authenticity and self-knowledge. And essentially that is really resisting colonized knowledge and practices. And some of the other kind of principles that are aligned with this framework include, right, critical consciousness, so critically reflecting and acting on socio-political environments, so questioning power dynamics. There's also this exploration of emotional and social support, providing a space for collective emotional labor, engaging in radical hope, which is the belief that one can actually fight for justice and that fight is not futile, as well as engaging in strength and resistance. So finding healthy coping and engaging in resistance strategies against oppression and racial trauma. So again, I really love that framework, and there's many derivatives of this work, and I encourage you to tap into that. So how do I actually synthesize or integrate social justice in the clinical practice that I engage in? Well, that certainly engages, it has certainly taken a lot of effort. And I think, again, during my experiences at Howard University, where I was actually able to witness in some clinical experiences, witness Black psychologists show up as their authentic selves, center Africanness within their practice, to see that I can do that, that I can make a living doing the things that are aligned with my cultural values, with my heritage. That was pivotal in how I then experienced my training in clinical psychology. Clinical psych for me was very medical model based on symptoms, based on oftentimes the deficits around individuals. And again, by engaging in kind of African-centered praxis, it helped me to see or understand like what the whole person, or to consider the whole person, not just the diagnoses, right? So leaning into African-centered work, leaning into Native-centered work helped me to kind of move forward with how I wanted to operate and practice in the world. So my work during my master's, I was able to see one of the practicums I had was at the Union of Pan-Asian Communities. And they certainly focused on Asian American mental health and praxis. And they were, there was a lot of coalition building within the work that they did in minoritized communities. So I was able to not only treat Asian American folks, but folks across ethnically and racially diverse backgrounds, as well as socioeconomic backgrounds. Engaging in CEs and trainings in order to help me show up and have voice was critical during this time too. And my work in graduate school at the University of North Dakota, again, centered around the experiences of American Indian, Alaska Native individuals and communities. So that for me was the first time working with Indigenous healers, understanding the importance of engagement with sweat lodges, tobacco, sage, and other medicines that were helpful for communities. And that time really helped me to understand the experiences of American Indian and Alaska Native folks and folks who were in rural communities. So really being thoughtful and intentional about the types of assessments that were done, trauma-informed and culturally informed approaches and praxis, and engaging in work that was ethical. Those were really critical. And staying on top of this work through CEs, trainings, and supportive spaces was really necessary. Currently, I engage in this synthesis of feminist and social justice and liberation, kind of valued approaches to the way I provide treatment with adults and couples. I stay grounded in these efforts through trainings, through CEs, and accountability groups. I'm not just doing this on my own. I have to have peer and consultation efforts around this work to help me stay accountable. I wanted to highlight a few wonderful lessons and insights from Black and Indigenous feminist mentors. There are more than these folks who are represented here. These individuals really helped, I think, cultivate some of my experiences, and they kind of stood in supporting me early on in my journey, and I can still tap into them today, but they really helped me to understand that I need to and should always trust Black and Indigenous women, follow them, do the things, see how they show up in the world, and particularly how they advocate for themselves and the communities that they're in connection with. They also really affirmed for me the importance of engaging in culturally informed and trauma-informed work that elevates ethical practices. So that was grounded in some of the lessons that I learned from these individuals, and the need to give back to the communities that you're part of and that you're aligned with. That you're not just out here doing this work for self, that you're doing this in context of others and communities. So that has showed up in the advocacy efforts in terms of social justice. I think certainly, you know, during the years at Howard, very connected with community service efforts and developing a network. I have a knack actually for that. So was doing that very early on during my undergrad years. And that elevated once I engaged in efforts in graduate school. So I was encouraged to engage in activism at the local level. So making sure I understood like how multiculturalism was impacting um, our institution, or how it was it showed up within our institution and surrounding communities, how social justice was maybe being experienced, and what types of issues um, uh, were kind of manifested in terms of equity efforts, how things were inequitable for certain community members versus others, looking at racism, white supremacy within those spaces too. And not just staying on a local level, but thinking about that nationally. So how could I engage in those efforts, um, perhaps within APA and in committee work and division work in that way. I was able to take part in interventions with ACLU on local efforts, engagement in campaigns, outreach and op-eds, and other ways that, again, helped me to find voice as I was navigating my graduate experience. So they were protected, but also encouraged me to step out and uh, not only advocate for my own community, but connect with other communities that were struggling too. And currently, it shows up in like all the things, right? So I infuse social justice advocacy in the way that I teach, the way that I train other clinicians and supervise them, and consultation courses too, and engage in specific efforts that impact communities like No Dapple and advocating for Black and Brown communities regularly. That gives me joy in life, and it's meaningful. Certainly during the pandemic, BLM and Academics for Black Lives, racism, the sentiment that racism is a virus, those all those were natural spaces to step in and advocate in, or help to hold my institution accountable for, in ways that was, I think, continue to be pivotal and helpful, I think, for faculty and students alike. I still engage in mentorship through my work with reservation graduation, in addition to Pathways Through Feminist Psychology, which is an effort that looks at high school students in minoritized communities and help them to understand like their role and place within psychology. So the encouragement is that they will find a home within psychology. This is an effort through Division 35, but I think that it's relevant for all divisions. And another effort that I took part in that has to do with social justice is a book that I co-authored with my colleagues, Roylene Ross and Milton Fuentes, that focused on child maltreatment from the lens of American Indian and Alaska Native perspectives. And we really kind of shift the focus of child maltreatment on like genocide and white supremacy, and how that very much and historical trauma, how that very much has impacted the experiences of Native folks and child maltreatment. And we really centered and grounded our voice in Indigenous feminists in an Indigenous feminist praxis. So I know I'm getting to that time. I wanted to shed light on some of the wisdoms from Doctors Jessica Smeedley, Della Mosley, and Cal Mays, and their work has helped me to stay present and grounded. And my kind of interpretations of some of the work that they've done includes this self-discovery and the asks around the following questions. Again, these are for you all. Think about who you are in the context of social justice, perhaps as a social justice researcher, clinician, and advocate. If you can think about yourself in those roles, what might important factors be in your life that help you define who you are in those roles? And how might you give yourself permission to be yourself, or your authentic self, in those roles? How could you do that? Smeedy in her work talks about taking off the mask, having the courage to take off the mask. There is this idea of shifting amongst African Americans where we engage in this practice for survival in our society. We have to put on masks, show up, protect ourselves, but there are instances that you might need to remove that mask, and really thinking about those instances when you need to and show up as your full self or aspects of your full self. And how can you do that in a way that might be safe? And thinking about again what that mask might represent for yourself. Dr. Della Mosley does a wonderful exercise, and I encourage you to get tap into all of these folks' work. She does work around wholeness, and I wanted to shift some of her questions around wholeness to engagement with social justice. What might be your wildest dreams for social justice? And what practice would kind of get you closer to that dream? So what might you do to help get you closer to that dream for social justice? And lean on the work of Dr. Kyle Mays, who stresses and touches on the need for coalition building with Indigenous and Afro-Indigenous communities, and the notion of kind of imagining and then envisioning a society that we actually want to live in, right? And that idea that liberation takes work, that it takes compassion, love, and patience. And this journey will not be easy at all, but it is necessary. I have some additional questions that, again, I don't know if we want to maybe sit with these questions and have some discussion around this or discussion around some of the things that I've presented. I am now at the end of my presentation, but wanted to offer these questions for kind of critical reflection. And they include, like, what are some specific ways that you can imagine um, in your healing and helping within your communities or within your ethnic or cultural groups? So what are specific ways that you might be able to show up in those spaces? And then what are specific ways that you might heal and help outside of your communities? And how might you show up better for these communities given your personal values? And finally, what restorative practices will you put into place? How can you remain whole and sustained while engaging in these really critical values and efforts?
Thank you so much, Dr. Green. This has been really helpful and just insightful is a better term. Insightful and